Sometimes the hero dies at the end. Cause of death, suicide. By lynching. By flurry of bullets. By random act of violence after daring to stand up and break the silence in broad daylight. Our heroes are crucified because didn't you know? Revolution is suicide, but so is compliance. Betrayed by our own reliance on a system formed to view us improperly as either problems or property.
Okay, yeah. Alright, clap again whenever you're ready, and then you can ask a question.
So the People's Budget is something that the Jacksonville Community Action Committee created to basically show the city the potential that we have with the proper investments. As it stands right now, the city budget allocates 40% of the funds to Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. People's Budget would slash that in half and put the newly freed funds back into other parts of the community, like neighborhoods, like children's programs, like mental health, public health, all the things that we walk around and we see in our neighborhood that we know that we need. People's Budget would actually address those things financially. If Jacksonville funded mental health services, social services, and other things of that nature in the same capacity that we've funded the police, we would actually start seeing a reduction in crime. So as it stands right now, we've given more and more money into JSO with this illusion that more money, more police equals less crime. But we've not actually seen any significant decrease in crime. And that's because putting money into the police is not a preventative step. It's not crime prevention. It's crime reaction. All the police can do is react to crimes that have already happened. If we actually invested in preventative measures, then we would see less crime. There's no correlation between more cops and less crime or more money into the police and less crime, but there are correlations between more investing in the social roots of crime to crime prevention.
So Springfield, even though it's being gentrified, is still a flood zone. So the infrastructure still hasn't been fixed. So what we have is streets that just flood anytime it rains. It doesn't matter how much. And then what happens, because we don't have enough storm drains, is the water just sits there for days, for weeks sometimes if it's a heavy rain, which attracts mosquitoes, which just makes it get dirty, which is disgusting. So kids will be outside playing, getting bit up by a bunch of mosquitoes because this water just lies there stagnant for days and weeks sometimes.
Yeah, and it also damages cars. It becomes a health hazard for kids who are in the water because, like you said, the water sits for days. And for an area that's being so highly gentrified, you'd think that they would take more care into the infrastructure, but they obviously have not. And that just shows like the double-sided cruelty of gentrification.
Not only that, they're gentrifying these areas, they're moving us out of the area. And it's just a vicious cycle, you know. It's like these houses used to be Black-owned mansions. They used to be owned by families who were here for generations. And then there were a few things that happened. There was the fire that happened like 100 years ago.
1901.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But then also there was that Super Bowl that happened where they used the JAG Stadium. Hey, what's up, man?
Hey.
But when they came to do that, apparently they offered the residents money for them to move out of their property.
Yeah.
And a lot of people didn't have jobs or didn't have money, so offering them a check seemed like a good idea at the time.
Right.
So they actually gave up their property.
Yeah, and ever since then, rent has been increasing. I mean, constantly. So they moved the historic Black owners out of their homes and then brought in new residents and have just increased rent consistently. I just got told in my own apartment that rent's going to be increased by $100 in a few months. I know your old apartment is an Airbnb now.
It's an Airbnb now, and it's ironic because we only stay in this neighborhood because our neighbors, the ones that we were just waving to actually, they like our community work and they want to keep the community together. So they invited us to live in the back of their house for an affordable price. But it's right next door to my old apartment, which is an Airbnb now.
Yeah,
So
and we choose to live in this community because it's close to a lot of the community work that we do, the activism, the organizing that we do. And it shows that there is just a level of disrespect for those who are living in this neighborhood, who are being constantly pushed out due to rent spike.
Yep, and then even just right down the street, you have 9th and Liberty right over there, which is where Vernell Bing Jr. was killed by Officer Tyler Lanerville, who's still patrolling these streets and still killing people here. So the historically black neighborhoods are changing.
Every day, it gets harder telling victim from martyr, so with that in mind, there's one question I harbor. Is there a such thing as a heaven for those who commit revolutionary suicide? A promised land for those who are sent over the hill before their people reach the top of the mountain? Because the answer seems like no, but instead fire and brimstone as legacies are lynched and repurposed.
You want to come sit up here with TT? If you do.
So, be okay with this in the background? You see how the slides like that?
So one of the great things about the People's Budget is the Public Works Initiative. So currently we have the Division of Public Works, which is under the City of Jacksonville, which is grossly underfunded. The People's Budget calls for a $40 million reallocation from JSO funds to the Division of Public Works. What that can do is it can create 1,000 living wage jobs at a salary of $16 an hour to start off with, which can supply jobs and address issues of poverty as well as crime here in Jacksonville. It can also give this Division of Public Works the resources and the labor power needed to help rebuild Jacksonville's infrastructure and as well as address a lot of the crumbling bridges, horrible roads that we have in Jacksonville. So that's one of the biggest things that we have in the People's Budget is this Public Works Initiative. It's also a jobs initiative that could really strengthen organized labor here in Jacksonville, which in turn will strengthen our neighborhoods and Jacksonville as a whole.
Yeah, so the People's Budget legislation actually has 6 points. So we have community control of the police, creation of an urban core development authority, strengthening organized labor, empowering black-owned businesses and firms, decriminalization of marijuana and other victimless crimes, as well as keeping rent affordable. So let's go ahead and talk about the first one. So we have community control of the police in the form of a JCAC, a Jacksonville Police Accountability Council, which would essentially be people electing members of this council from their neighborhood. So it would be wives of cops, daughters of cops, the sheriff, the mayor. These people would be appointed by and elected by the community, and it would give this council the ability to have subpoena powers, hire and fire cops, control police budgets, so on and so forth. Then we have the creation of the Urban Core Development Authority, which is essentially a program that will address the infrastructure here in Jacksonville. It would benefit Districts 7 through 10, which are historically black areas here that deal with infrastructure issues. Then it would strengthen organized labor by developing a union neutrality ordinance. So basically, we see that unions are very helpful. Unions protect people that labor and build this country. So that union neutrality ordinance would definitely help with that. Then we have empowering black-owned businesses and firms. So here in our city, not a lot of black-owned businesses and firms get grants. So this would basically have these grants go to black-owned businesses and black-owned firms, which would actually be really great for the local economy here in Jacksonville. Then we have decriminalizing marijuana, because we've seen the uptick in the big business of marijuana. And it's time to let people who have committed offenses of maybe selling marijuana or smoking marijuana that are still in jail or still in prison to be freed. Because at this point, criminalizing marijuana does affect more black people than it does white people, and we have to start making amends for that. So decriminalizing marijuana is also part of the People's Budget legislation, and that will definitely be helpful because marijuana should not be criminalized. And lastly, we have keeping rent affordable. So a rent freeze. Here in Jacksonville, rent is sky high and it goes up every single year. Whether it's $100, $200, $300, rent is ridiculous, and the cost of living here does not match with what people make in their minimum wage or what people make hourly. It just doesn't. So this would definitely help keep rent affordable here in Jacksonville, and it would even address things like gentrification, where we have houses like, for example, in Springfield that it was a predominantly black neighborhood, but now we're seeing that it's getting more white and more expensive. Some houses out in Springfield for a 1-bedroom is $1,000, and that's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, I guess like.
Their quotes reworded to get us to behave until whole movements are perverted to return us to slaves. Docile and complacent, content to settle for what we're given, accepting oppressive systems as that's just the world we live in, but still happy to see a few of us break precedents because of what it represents.
It's critically important to fund public libraries in our community because they are such a central hub to actually the health of the community. They're one of the last places where you can exist in public and not have to pay anything just to be there, which is crucial for our homeless population, for them to have somewhere to be. They provide so much training and education, job training. They provide access to the internet for people that are teleworking, for people that just don't have internet access in their homes. They provide language services. Just so many valuable services to the community are provided by libraries that we need to fund, and we need to keep them going because they're a critical resource to everyone, rich or poor.
Here?
Somebody make her laugh.
The purpose of the people's budget is mostly to reallocate funds and reinvest them into the community for things like creating living wage jobs, for expanding access to capital for Black entrepreneurs and Black small businesses, to address food insecurity, and to address neighborhood and community infrastructure. There are lots of things such as public libraries, public transportation, and just really addressing all these different things that we need in the community, because it's more than just telling folks to get a job. They have to have access to ways to apply for that job, as well as access to transportation to that job, and to have adequate childcare and sufficient childcare while they are at that job. In order to really build up our communities, we have to address all the different ways in which inequities exist. And in order to do that, we have a really great opportunity right now to take funding that is really unjustly given to JSO and reinvest it into our communities, to the people that it really belongs to, in order to create and sustain a community that will allow folks to, have access to what I think we all consider to be basic human rights.
So, yeah, the bus system is just like, it really is just like insane. It makes no sense. And like, if you're gonna go somewhere and use any bus in Jacksonville, you have to like completely block off your whole day. Like, yeah. I know of people who have like actually lost jobs because they just couldn't consistently get to work on time, because there's no way to rely on the bus system as it works currently.
Right. Yeah, I was. I've gotten in trouble a lot at jobs because if you show up like to the bus stop, like you think you're on time, but the bus might have passed you by already 5 minutes ago, or like you'll show up and stand there and the bus will like be a little bit behind, so they'll just miss your stop and you're stuck waiting another like 45 minutes.
Yeah. And that's another thing with schooling. We have like the illusion of school choice in Jacksonville, but without added transportation options, like who is that choice for, really?
Exactly.
We have the money to be able to create these things for our city, to have covered bus stops that are safe, to have multiple bus stops, to have different routes for people. Yeah. But what we have to do is reallocate and reinvest the money that is, completely bloating JSO's budget. And if we were able to reinvest that into the community, we could start to create things like this to increase access to transportation.
Exactly. Make it so that people actually have a chance to get to a job. Even if they live on one side of town, they could, commute to another side of town and just raise the standard of living for so many people. That's another thing too. There's such a lack of housing in Jacksonville. I don't think people realize that, like the lack of affordable housing. It's like, I don't think you realize if you were to find yourself homeless right now, like how hard it would be to get into just housing in general, but affordable housing, that's
yeah. Well, people think that we have these services in Jacksonville, and we do, which is great, but the wait lists are so long. So if you're in a crisis, you have nothing to, there's nowhere to turn. Anywhere you go, you're going to have a wait list. You're going to have a wait list to get into a shelter to stay with your family.
Right.
You're going to have a wait list to access affordable housing. Nothing's just going to be like, okay, you're in crisis, let's help you right now.
Right.
You can maybe get like a one night at a time at a shelter, but in order to do that, you have to get there so early in the day. It's such a stressful thing. And then again, brings up the topic of transportation. So it's a huge cycle of
everything's
really
stretched
just,
so thin.
Yes.
And it doesn't have to be, give people a chance, increase the standard of living for everybody, and you'll see how this city can flourish.
Freedom will never be free. Justice will never be given. Justice must be demanded. We have to keep our feet planted. We have to understand that the only land that we're promised is the one that we build. Malcolm X anticipated being killed, so he selected fertile minds to plant seeds in so that they may take root and blossom in another season for their children to enjoy a brand new Garden of Eden.
I've been in Jacksonville my whole life, and the infrastructure here on the north side, the east side, is completely different from the infrastructure on the south side in the Mandarin area. So we definitely need to have a people's budget to make sure that those funds are not allocated to the police. More policing does not equate to less crime. So we need to put that money into the community, to build up the community, to have our fellow community members have jobs, better education, mental health opportunities there as well.
We are the Jacksonville Community Action Committee. We're out here today because the fight still continues. As you've already noticed, this is a war. They have been called, this is a war, and people are getting shot and people have picked sides. We're not asking for change, we are demanding it.
April 11th, 2020 at 5:18, I received the phone call, cops done shot your daughter. I don't want to ever have anybody else have to hear that phone call. There needs to be more education for mental illness. And in the people's budget, not only do they want to give more for mental illness, they want to help the homeless community. 20% of homeless people have mental illness, a severe mental illness. Let's help these people. Give some power to the community. We're living in the community. We know what our loved ones need.
No justice, no peace. The mere fact that we're across the street from the police department and the memorial building, we're shaking up the very foundation that have been planted on this land.
Money for jobs. Money for housing. Money for roads. Money for everything else. And as the rain pours down, there was a great quote by Dr. King. He said, Bull Connor knew a certain type of water, but there's a certain type of fire that no water can put out. And we have that fire here in Jacksonville, Florida. And simply put, we're not going to stop. We're not going to stop until we get our city government officials to listen to us. We're not going to stop until our budget that we pay our tax dollars to goes to develop our communities. But we got to keep fighting. What I want folks to do is make sure you email and call your city council person. Tell them you want a people's budget. What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now! If we don't get it, shut it down! 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 Thank y'all.
And the hero's death doesn't have to mean the end. Because when we honor their sacrifice, it's almost like they're brought back to life. Like death is no longer a permanent solution. You know, like how Fred Hampton said you can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill a revolution, or how Huey P. Newton never feared death. He feared death without meaning. But if we're not willing to put in the work now, what's it worth dreaming more so than being ready to die for a cause? We have to be ready to live. Live and break the cycle, because revolution is not suicide. It's survival.
Like he can't really get you, and then you got the max, so he's out there. He did good. That's why I
Okay, quiet.
It's just our entourage. It's like, we never walk alone. We always have people
They go where we go.
So those are the 6 points of the People's Budget legislation, and yeah. That's it. Okay, cool. Is there anything that you wanted me to...
The funniest thing Kobe could have done. Just drag a piece of cardboard.
Or how Fred Hampton, and I'm getting them mixed up, but that's okay because it's just B-roll, right?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, any other angles?
Do some poses.
Some poses.
Yeah.
Right?
Like, buy our merch.